certainly enjoyed speaking with you last time. And again, I hope work is not too terrible. I'm curious what you've been thinking on working on and life in general. And like I said, yeah, I really sometimes I kind of laugh because I'm like, where did the last 2 weeks go? Like, it's just like, both like, where did it go? And I'm afraid as I get older, it just like, it's not, now I'm getting to the point where I'm like, why do years feel like months? Oh no, why do years feel like months? Maybe because time and the experience of the subject are more connected than we like to think. So hard to say, but I'd be curious to hear what you've been thinking about and working on, my dear friend. It's good to see you again.
Likewise. So, I've been doing heaps of research on a whole bunch of different things, some philosophy, a lot of science stuff. Also, I spent some time looking where we continued on from our last chat about time and the notion of us apprehending beings and how we sort of phrase things in noun-based rather than verb-based languaging, and started looking at a lot of scientific research, mainly theoretical, around notions of time. I mean, we spoke before about the idea that if time was like this moving present, that everything was kind of relative to this moving coordinate grid rather than something that's t equals 0 and everything blah blah blah.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, there's just an absolute plethora of stuff around that. And then I was thinking a little bit more around, I think that we talk a little bit about large language models, and one of the possible probable limitations of them, which is they are kind of extrapolating based on the known, based on sets of data and relationships between those data. And what they don't seem to do is to have this imaginal quality to them. They talk about them having hallucinations, which is just simply where they kind of go off track in a way that human readers and viewers can detect. Right. They're no really more or less of hallucination, perhaps, other than how they seem to conform to the reality as we understand it. But what they don't do, and this is kind of, I'm not sure we talked about this last time, so you can tell me whether we did and we could skip on, but I was listening to a talk recently between Stephen Wolfram and Eric Weinstein. And, back in the early 90s, Wolfram published this book called A New Science, or A New Kind of Science. And what he is doing is his entire intellectual project, which seems to have made incredible discoveries and reformulations of, let's call it, the laws of physics and an awful lot more, was to do with the computational approach. And, I think I mentioned before that, the thing with computational approaches, or even with physics in general, it's kind of like, here's the theory, here's the equations, here's the initial conditions, now go. But then what's the go? I mean, where does that come from? I mean, what's doing the going? And it's in the theory. Well, it's still kind of static as a theory, and what's breathing life into this? I mean, time does be this aspect of reality that's more fundamental or more immediate or visceral than anything else. And likewise with the computational approaches, Wolfram, and again, I don't know enough about any of this, could be grossly mischaracterizing him, but again, if you've got steps in a computational approach, here's a step, or here's the initial condition, a state, and then there's a transformation, which is like a rule, and this is the state, and then you apply the rule, and then here's the next state, and then you apply the rule again, and here's the next state, and you look at that, you look at all the patterns that emerge over, potentially hundreds, thousands, millions, billions of steps, and see what emerges. But then this thing about applying the rule, it's like, again, this temporal aspect, this what is doing the applying. And unless it's more like saying, if you apply the rule, this is what happens. But where is it saying, right here, you can point and go, there's the applying happening. It's sort of not in there unless I've fundamentally misunderstood things. So, but there's this new computational approach has looked at many, many rules. In fact, what Wolfram did was come up with all possible rules given a certain size state. And then there's very famously rule 31. Can't remember what that is exactly, but it's just essentially a very simple rule. It applies a transformation from this state to the next state and so on. And that out of that, what you find is large tracts of this state space that evolves over time that look very static and maybe nothing going on. It's just repeating the same state again and again and again for part of the state. And then there's a part that looks like chaos, and it's just more or less about as random as anything could get from this very deterministic computational approach. And then somewhere in the middle between the two is this emergent complexity. So with complexity, you have this kind of balance between, absolute order, which is just essentially undifferentiated sameness, and absolute chaos, which is just completely and utterly maximal differentiation of difference. And in the middle, you have an emergent complexity. And then from within that, he has been able to derive fundamental physical theories. All right. So things like special theory of relativity kind of emerges out of it. But rather than going into any more details about what is emerging out of this and this growing movement, bandwagon, if you like, of researchers and physicists and computer scientists and so on, even quantum physicists, quantum computation, and seeing how all of these things could emerge out of this fundamentally new kind of approach to theory, approach to prediction, even what might emerge as empirical testability. And so, yeah, that was a very interesting thing. And it's very, very different to the conventional scientific mathematical approach, which is essentially based on equations, which, in some sense is a vast, infinite landscape of all possible tautologies. That's maths. But then, to the degree that we assign meaning to a symbol, or meaning to an equation, or meaning to one side of the equation, and what that equals some other things. So there's two different things that may be emerging out of two different aspects of the maths. And essentially you'll say these two things are equivalent. So, somehow for maths to turn into physics, it has to, generally it's relying on observation, and, where that observation then feeds into the meanings of those symbols. Those symbols are used to represent the observations in some sense. But this, and again, starting with an initial state and then using those equations, what it really leaves out is, imagine that, let's just imagine quantum physics was the theory of everything, and out of that, and it's not, because it leaves out relativity, leaves out gravity. But imagine that it was, and then we can say, yes, this accounts for all known empirical observations, and pretty sure that it's going to account for all possible future empirical observations. And if it's really a description of the very beginning of what empirically looks like the beginning of the Big Bang, there's lots of evidence for that event. And then you start there, you have that initial condition, here's your equation, and then in principle, you could calculate any future state of the universe. But the problem with it, in a way, is that, that becomes either computationally or in terms of the amount of time it would take, it is effectively impossible to actually do that calculation, to actually calculate the entire universe. And so, in a sense, it sort of does leave out the actual capacity to apply it practically, for any given state. Obviously, usually it's applied, whether it's relativity or whether it's quantum physics, it's being applied to any specific observation. But then inferring that it's applicable for all time and all space and all observations and so on and so forth. Whereas Wolfram's sort of computational approach is really, you can drill down into any step or any state at any time and see logically what states came before as far back as you want to go, and what states come next as far forward as you want to go. And it is completely deterministic, except for this fact that perhaps some aspect of true randomness. As I say, some aspects of quantum physics are emerging out of this computational representation. And so maybe true randomness can come out of determinism, which would seem contradictory. So that was one of the things I was kind of looking at a little bit, but it was certainly like when I started looking up other theories that look at time as a moving present, there turned out to be rather a lot going on in that field, and I kind of had to move on to other things. It was just getting a bit too epic. But another thing I was considering is, thinking about Hegel's science of logic, or actually his phenomenology of spirit, something that emerged in his time, his attempts, incredible attempts to I mean, everything gets translated into words and concepts, and perhaps there's a reduction. That's what we're all doing, essentially, even trying to communicate with each other, and perhaps even the thoughts that we have within our heads about what we're experiencing is an inevitable reduction of experience, in some sense, into language, into concept, and obviously with Hegel's notion of the absolute concept or absolute knowing, seems to me, after my own kind of awakening, for want of a better word, to my own intuitive self, my own something that I've been thinking about, this difference between the intuitive mind or the intuition and the rational mind, the reasoning mind, and looking at these different layers of experience that happen and what sort of order of primacy they might have, and how that might tie into getting to something like a more higher order understanding of Hegel's phenomenology of spirit. So it was really a question of, well, what is spirit? And how do we get to that? And if there's an aspect of that which is our immediate experiential reality, you know, we might say that there's the spirit, the soul, the experiencing being or doing or happening, and something visceral there that is often talked about in the Eastern literature and the contemplative traditions and the yogic traditions, where there's levels of awareness that sort of precede thought, that enclose thought, that are the ground of experience. And you know, there's a great deal of literature over thousands of years around that, and practice, you know, so there's this notion of actually practice in order to come into awareness, rather than learning sort of didactically, learning through words and concepts. That's not how you come to it. And for most of us, I think most of the time, I'll really only speak for myself, you know, it's like, as Dennett put it once, you know, we're all experts on consciousness, right? Because we've all got it. But what exactly are we saying? And this capacity to understand the depth or breadth or immediacy, like the let's call it the heights of immediacy of experience. And so anyway, coming back to this idea about spirit and my own sort of deepening into an intuitive awareness, sitting on the rational reasoning, scientific, materialist side of the fence for so many years, it's like, well, in a way, it's like, well, what is that fence? You know, is there a separation there? And there appears to be. It's like, I've lived in this community, as you know, New Age community, alternative community, vast amounts of different spiritual, more intuitive understandings and worldviews and ways of being that are immediately around me, that I can observe, that I can participate in, that I can engage with. And there does seem to be this, perhaps not an impenetrable dichotomy by any stretch, but a dichotomy between the intuitive, the intuiting mind, and where we're led to, you know, beliefs and certainty about, you know, like a solid ground from which we can orientate ourselves in a practical, in an understanding of how to move through life. And then on the other side of the scientific, rational, material, descriptive, it's kind of this inert layer of description. But out of that, I mean, it's partly down to this is-ought distinction as well. It's like, how can we derive ought from is? Like, how should I live my life? It's like, well, here's a description of it in the most, you know, exquisite detail, at least to some level of detail from the scientific and empirical. So here's that. Now go, off you go, live your life. It's like, well, not a lot in there really. Maybe there's a lot coming out of psychology, developmental psychology, you know, how to raise your children, you know, what's the empirical evidence shows the most successful way to raise your kids, what's the empirical evidence shows the most way to be nutritious and have good mental health. And maybe, you know, out of that you could imagine a prescription for how to live a good life, how to live a flourishing life, a successful life, a healthy life, a life with healthy relationships, how to get on well with others. And there's something about the notion of the empirical, you know, let's just forget the theory and just look at the data. And then intuitively, I guess, you go, well, what actually would apply well to my life? The positive outcomes. Am I suffering or am I not suffering? Am I flourishing or not flourishing? Am I developing healthy relationships with people that are nourishing me, nourishing them? And then out of that, there's essentially a sort of a proscriptive or worldview of what you ought to do if you want to live a flourishing life. And none of that necessarily requires a theory per se, perhaps some. So that's one thing we could, there's another thing. And I just mentioned one other thing that I've been chewing on around spirit is the concept that maybe spirit is a retcon of experience. So with retcon, we've got this tool often used in fiction and in literature and in cinema. I was a big fan of Isaac Asimov when I was growing up. I read many of his books, and although he's known very much as a sci-fi author, he also wrote dozens and dozens of mystery stories, short stories like the Black Widower mysteries and things like that. And it was always this group of usually men in a men's club talking about some crime that had been committed, and they all give their ideas about theories on what's actually happened, and then inevitably it's the butler that always solves the crime, right? And he said that his greatest influence was Agatha Christie as a writer. And so he was a master of retcon, as was she. So this notion of retrospective continuity, where some events have happened here at the beginning of the story, and the story unfolds, and now some other revelations or disclosures have occurred, and what they've done is they've completely altered your understanding of what happened in the beginning of the tale, right? So it might have all made perfect sense. It might have been very well explicated in the beginning, and it might be very clear that what's happened. And then now, because some character actually had some other agenda, or came from his motives were hidden until now, and then you realize that those events in the beginning actually have a completely different explanation or a different meaning. So this as a model for thinking about the way that we are living our lives, experiencing our lives, and that spirit, in a sense, is perhaps an interpretation of reality, of inner reality, of our past experience, of our sense of what might be coming, so sort of projective and predictive intuition, and also our sense of what other people are meaning, how to make sense of it, and also even aspects of the world. So, I'm sitting here and I may be having a conversation about some particular aspect of indigenous dreaming. I'm living in Australia, so Aboriginal and Indigenous worldview might talk about the significance and meaning of the kookaburra, and then at the same moment I look over on my fence and there's a kookaburra looking at me. It's like, well, hello. I mean, why? I was just talking about this thing, and now I've got, so there's these signs in the world. It's kind of like we've got this built-in intuitive semiotics going on, and we interpret that to mean something outside of ourselves. Perhaps, maybe that's just me looking at it through this materialist lens, that somehow there's this something else going on here between my experience, between my connection with spirit, and actual events in the real world that then speak to me with this really strong meaning. And so what we might be doing is essentially just constantly retconning our experience, whether, as I say, a future projection, an intuition about coming events, which might be, local to me and my life, or broadly in the world, and then even reflecting on my own past experience and how that's arising me now, where, maybe I've had some altercation or potent experience here in the present, and in the next moment or in a day from now, some memory pops up that has now taken on a completely different meaning because, or I've got a different relationship with it because of what happened yesterday, because of that present time experience that I had, that's now opened up the connection to my past, and that it is now being reinterpreted through the lens of my present experience. And then, as I say, sort of horizontally through our experience with others and our interpretations of what their lives and their actions and their understandings, and how that reflects back into me, and what will feel intuitively correct rather than just some sort of analysis of truth claims and conceptual cogency and so on. So coming then into this kind of locus of experience. And I've always been a fan of Sartre in this regard. I really deeply kind of enjoyed and grokked Sartre's notion of this sort of in the imminent now. There's a nothingness, the heart of the for itself, and then it's only into that being arises. So the being of the it in itself arises as being only in virtue of me being a nothingness that negates being in order for being to arise within it. So there's this sort of rather deliciously convoluted and paradoxical explication there. And then also the past, you are your past in this moment, but only in the mode of not being it anymore. And you are your future in the mode of not being it yet. So there's yet being and no longer being, and these sort of temporal aspects of being that are all somehow here in the now, in some sense. So then I was thinking about, well, you know, we talked last time about Berkeley. I mentioned that about this, at least one bifurcation into the immaterialism and the immaterialist and the idealist, perhaps. Maybe that was going on much earlier, but at least there's immaterial, and then the materialists kind of splitting there. And, you know, the dialogue between Hylas and Philonous, and one of them saying, you know, I think it was Philonous, the philosopher, like if his hands are different temperatures and he puts one into a bucket of water, it's going to feel maybe cooler because his hand is warmer than the water. He puts the other hand into the water and it feels colder because his hand is colder than the water. Well, whatever way around, I've got that. Get the point? So it came down to whether you can absolutely or deductively conclude that there is a material world or not. And if not, everything is essentially mental, immaterial. For him, it was all held together in the mind of God, which is still mind. And then for the materialists, it's like, well, no, we're just gonna accept that it's an inference that there's an external cause, whether you call that material substance, and on that basis, the entire scientific enterprise, more or less, objective reality, what it is that gives rise to our sense perception. But then right there at this first kind of ground, which I think is an experiential thing as well. I don't think I'm just being sort of conceptual or objective about this, but sense perception. I'm experiencing, at least part of my experience is what I'm sensing. I mean, I can hear the fan behind me. I can hear the sound of my own voice. I can feel the seat I'm sitting on. I can see the screen. And now whether the seat and the screen and everything are really just part of this, are they material or immaterial? At the very least, there's sense perception. And what I sort of was thinking about that is that data, that actual reality taking place in the nervous system, neurons, right the way down into our fingers and toes and in our ears and our eyes and everything else, converted into, let's say, neural spike trains. There's some kind of meaning that comes in at some point there, or proto-meaning. Up it goes into the brain, or perhaps even other parts of the nervous system, where it's kind of processed. I hate to use these metaphors, but there's a sort of ground of that I think could be thought of as not just sense perception, but sense conjecture. Right. So whether that conjecturing is something that is like a layer of interpretation of the reality, which is of course heavily dependent on our actual phenotypic expression, our morphology, our physicality, the DNA instructions that made us, and the DNA itself is an encoding, the kind of cryptic encoding of the past environments of all of our ancestors who survived to reproductive age going back billions of years. And so to whatever degree that my sense perception is, it's already massively colored in some direction or another. Even apparently the hormones and the neurotransmitters and levels of cortisol are different when looking at red than when looking at green. Now, it's simply this differentiation in colors. This is a physiological response and the triggering to some minor degree of the fight-flight mechanism. So in that degree, sense perception is also sense conjecture. Your physical being, your evolved being, is making prediction, even at the lowest level. And then what the next level on top of that then would appear to be, prior to the abstractive machinery, the rationalizations, the reasoning, is the intuition. It seems to me that's sort of a next upgrade, perhaps a more mental phenomenon, but nonetheless the intuition kicks in and often hits us in a much more visceral way than reasoning about things. I mean, often I might reason about something or think about things or interpretations of experience, and then they might hit me in a kind of like, oh, right, that idea that I just had about what was going on has now struck me with a greater degree of truth, and it might have a great import in some relationship that I'm having, and fuck, what am I going to do about it? So it can certainly hit us in a visceral way, but the intuition seems that it arises in a much more immediate way on top of this sense conjecturing, sensing. And because it does, it often, there's triggering emotions. It gives rise to ideas, thoughts, concepts. It immediately taps into our memories of things, so memories can arise. So the intuition is occurring. It's composed in some sense of some immediate detection of something, like the kookaburra on the fence. It's tapping into memory, which is often emotional, and it's generating thoughts. And I think there's some sense in which the intuitive mind, or intuiting, inevitably strikes us with a greater deal of viscerality. There's something more real. There's a realness to it that doesn't seem to come from this next kind of higher order or next order, or maybe it's just later in time even. Sense conjecture happening first, intuition happening next. So just in the temporal order rather than some hierarchical conceptual order, the next thing would appear to be the rationalizing, the reasoning mind. And that seems to be the domain where science and materialist, well, let's just say scientific thought works. And obviously with empirical observation, it's a very precise and considered relating with reality. You generally don't find that the best way to get scientific results or empirical results as a scientist is to be running for your life from danger, right? It's like, but maybe there's a good reason why that could lead to new kind of scientific discoveries. I don't know. So these levels of why things hit us in a certain way, and why we, I think for me, all of this is tying around a sort of higher meta order consideration about how we can be wedded to certainty. This notion, and I'll end on this notion that's, for me, perhaps certainty, and the way that we wed ourselves to beliefs in a way that is absolute, fixed, largely unalterable, without perhaps a great deal of our personality and our worldview and the tapestry of our lives kind of crumbling down. And I suppose, not really wanting to pick out any particular group, but certainly things like fundamentalist religious types do seem to have this great weddedness to certainty. And we can talk about where there's value in that and where there might be limitations in that, and issues with that. But I think it's just coming back then to conclude how this primacy of intuiting, which seems to happen first and be more visceral, is more likely to lead to a sense of certainty or rightness. The interconnection between the conversation I was having with someone about, indigenous worldviews and what the kookaburra represents, and what aspect of even the personality of the human might be represented by the life of the kookaburra. And then I see one on the fence, and I'm like, this is uncanny. And it strikes me with that. It's more likely to be true in some sense. And in fact, I don't even have to think about it in those terms, because the intuition has already spoken. And so that's some of the things I've been thinking about. Spirit as a retcon of experience, which we could explore further, and just these levels of how our experiencing self might be structured in the temporal dimension.
Man, Peter, that was grand. Oh my goodness. Oh, you're thinking about so many cool things all together. I salute you, my friend. First off, your explanation of Wolfram was very, very impressive, and I really appreciated everything you were getting into. So a number of things come to mind. First off, I've been thinking a lot. It's very interesting. I've been thinking a lot about what is theory and what is the business of theory? Because if we don't really have certainty, if there's always some sort of way in which our sense experience, I like what you were saying about a sense conjecture, like it's already kind of mediated, it's already sort of framed in different things, then what exactly are we doing when we come up with a theory or a certain understanding of things? And I've been thinking more and more about how we're constantly in the business of trying to figure out what's left out or what's not included. But the only way that you would actually map the territory in such a way that you would have a reliable indication of what's not included is if you really genuinely did your best to map it out. You couldn't possibly go into the business of creating a theory saying, hey, I'm creating a theory to figure out what's not included in the theory, because you'd hold back. You wouldn't do an amazing job. You wouldn't do your best. You have to genuinely go in and believe that your map is, okay, we say the map isn't the territory, but you kind of got to believe that your map's going to be really darn close to the territory, or else you're not going to put the effort in. And yet that very effort of trying to arise to a theory is ultimately in service, it seems, of helping you better understand what is left out, what is not included, so that you can then take the next step to kind of explore that. Like you were speaking with Wolfram on this question of what's kind of the initial thing to get it going. There's this idea of what is left out. If sense is already kind of framing experience. In Hegel, there's always the encountering of a limit. And spirit seems to be the recognition that something is being left out and you go to the next step. It's kind of interesting because I've been really interested. And it's also kind of funny that theory works great if you can assume the thing left out, or you just kind of skip it, right? Oh, then it works, which then the very fact that it seems to work would give you evidence reliable. So, but then what is this thing that's left out that seems like it would work if it wasn't left out, or if we had a better understanding of it, or different things? And I've been doing a lot on what exactly is demand in economics, because demand is often just assumed. It's just kind of there and we can stimulate it. But where does it come from? Why does it exist? And it's very interesting because a lot of theories of economics work really well if you just assume demand is there. But I would argue that you shouldn't assume demand is there, and not all demand is equal. Some people demand materialistic things that destroy the planet, and other people demand philosophical conversation. And where does demand come from? And if you don't know the difference between, what I've been trying to argue is between stimulating demand and creating demand, because often in economics those are conflated, but they're actually not the same thing. And what ends up happening is, if you can't tell the difference between those things, there seems to be something about first world nations that actually destroy demand. Actually, they lead toward a great stagnation. They lead toward where people don't really, people talk about nihilism, the meaning crisis, all these different things that can be critiqued. But generally, there is, according to Tyler Cohn and Peter Thiel, and I think it's true, a kind of, and Keynes talked about it as well, a great stagnation, where growth slows down, the amount of economic activity that occurs goes away, and it seems like demand goes away. Well, the way you address that is then trying to stimulate more materialism. Is that best? But we don't know what else to do. But what if we could figure out the conditions that cultivated demand or intrinsic motivation? Well, that's where economics for me has to go now, because that's been the thing that has been left out. You've traced all the theories that work really well if you can conflate creating demand and stimulating demand. But you might want to investigate that. Otherwise, you tend to be stuck in low growth, great stagnation, and all the unintended content. And then ultimately, very significant inefficiencies in the system. And also, the demand allows you to assume market equilibrium. And market equilibrium seems to be quite dangerous as an economic concept, because you could have equilibrium if everyone's unemployed and doesn't have a job. Okay, so there's good equilibrium and there's bad equilibrium, and a lot of it seems to ride if we have an understanding of demand. Well, another one is, I've been very interested in Tocqueville lately, on how does democracy work? And funny enough, we don't seem to actually know how democracy works. Tocqueville warned that democracy has this tendency to become controlled by special interest groups, money, and power. Well, then what is democracy? Where does it come from? We kind of just assume that if you give people freedom and you let people vote, that democracy just kind of happens. But there seems to be a big difference between democracy, a voting mechanism, and democracy as a culture of intellectual exchange. And in fact, I'm increasingly convinced that democracy is basically what we're doing. It's philosophical dialogue. And we actually have not identified that. And therefore, we've not known what to cultivate. And we've confused voting with a democratic culture, and they're not the same thing. Well, we've kind of left out what exactly creates a culture of democracy. We've just sort of assumed it's there if you create the conditions. Oh, but what's funny in both of these examples, which just makes me think of a lot that you were saying, you had to really kind of put all your faith in the economic theory to trace out all the possible territories and directions to genuinely arrive at the thing you've left out, that now you have to really think about to kind of go to the next level, right? In the same way that you had to really try democracy and all in political science and whatever, get to the places like, wait a minute, we've really not actually figured out what is the condition that makes democracy occur. My argument is that it's something non-rational. You have to look at how America had a frontier when Tocqueville is writing. What's a frontier is not merely geography, but it's an imagination. You can imagine what could be. And when you can do that, then even though America for Tocqueville was incredibly practical, the very facticity of America entailed basically philosophy, because there was imagination. Even if you were practical, you still as a practical person would have to imagine because of the frontier. So you got this sweet spot between, like you were saying, science and religion. You had a sweet spot between pragmatism and vision. And that sweet spot seems to be the thing that without democracy doesn't function. Well, here's the problem then. Okay, there's no frontiers now. So how do you create that sweet spot that democracy occurs? That's been left out. Now we have to think it. In the same way, and it's funny because when you talk about spirit, often the spiritual move in Hegel seems to be the realization of a left out. Like something is being left out or something can kind of be moved again. So for example, when the subject learns, like in the science of logic and all, when the subject learns that it can measure the world like a scientist, kind of objectively, and now I can look at the world as a scientist. The spiritual move is when then spirit kind of elevates and looks down and says, what kind of subject am I now that I think about reality in terms of science? Like, how does the act of measurement transform my way that I am toward the world? And that's kind of where then spirit has a new concept of itself that then in having that kind of meta consideration changes how it goes about doing scientific measurement. So there's a way in which it's almost like when you look at your face in the mirror and you see how the thought has changed you, that's kind of where the spirit sort of moves, right? So likewise, the spirit kind of arises when you go, wait a minute, the subject-object divide is something that I came up with, that I'm measuring reality according to. And there's kind of a way in which some of the ways I've thought about it is the spirit is the moments of breaking from determination to realize that it was that determination is shaping how that it sees, and now might we see differently. And there's a necessity, like I'll try to talk about a difference between determination and necessity. Like it's necessary for the spirit to see somehow, but once it sees itself determined by measurement to see in a certain way, now it has a bit of agency over how it sees and how it's going to go about seeing. What's interesting is it's almost like theory exists for us to, like, we're contained to the determination of theory or understanding. So we arrive at the place where we encounter a thing that's missing. So then we can kind of break out of the theory and see the thing missing and go, what kind of subject am I going to be? What kind of subject must I be to be able to see something that's missing? And then am I going to be the kind of subject that redetermines itself in light of this question that has not been addressed and move on? So for example, once you reach the end of self-consciousness and the phenomenology of spirit and you say, wait a minute, what if otherness is just as real as I am? Oh, spirit has hit a limit. Now it can ask the question and have a kind of choice. Am I going to fully identify with otherness or not? Now that I see that it might be just as real as I am, and it has to make that choice. And once it makes that choice, then it's going to recalibrate itself according to that new determination and then reach a new limit. Once it hits that limit, spirit then breaks free of its determinations, sees itself a new way and keeps going and keeps going. And spirit then also is a kind of collective intelligence as well, because when one person realizes that the act of measurement, according to science, changes themselves as a subject, now that idea can spread to everyone, seeing themselves as being changed by the act of measurement, which then feedback loop on other people, changes relationships, and so on and so forth. And really, like for Tocqueville, the problem is, and he's kind of like pointing to what Marx would point out, is people did not realize how their social interactions were gradually being mediated through business, commerce, capital, and how they treated one another changed. The spirit would be the realization of, wait a minute, how I relate to people is changed by capital. You see yourself and your relations in a meta sense changing how you relate because of capital. And you ask yourself the question, is that how I want to relate? is that the way that I want to be defined as a subject? And now spirit has to make a choice. It has no choice but to make a choice. You could see it that way as well. The spirit kind of arises when you encounter this thing. You now see that you have no choice but to either sublate or to ignore. Like, you either have to kind of push in and figure out, like, okay, what kind of subject must I be to be experiencing this and to see this, and to, like, what kind of subject must I be for it to be possible for my relations to be changed by capital, for them to be changed by a belief in otherness? And do I want to push into that because that's what's been left out of my understanding and my theory? Do I want to push into that and explore it, or do I want to ignore it? And you're kind of thrown to that choice. And there's a way in which theory is about getting you to the place where you almost have to make a choice, because you eventually encounter the thing that's left out, and you either have to push into that thing or run. But you can no longer, it's like those moments of spirits are the moments where you can no longer stay where you've been without it being an act of clear repression or ignoring. You either have to move into the next stage per se, or you have to live with yourself as running. And you can't go back. You can't go back. Now that you've seen the picture, you can't go back. And to me, also, one of the reasons why it seems like we need these different levels of, like, intuition, you were mentioning intuition, rationality. It's like you need the intuition to even, like, sense there's something to theorize, sense that there's something more, and then to even sense that this thing has been left out of the theory. So then you sense something, you rationalize, you do your very best to include everything, and you keep doing that because you intuit something. But then when you get to the thing that's left out, you can identify this has not been included yet. Like you were saying about this idea of, wait a minute, I was talking about this with my friend, and now there's that animal there, and it strikes you as having some sort of radical certainty that's embedded in that. You intuited that, but now you have to ask yourself the question, am I crazy? Am I self-deluded? Or is there actually something there? Is this certainty an indication of something? Or is it just superstition or something? You now have no choice but to confront that choice, right? You have no option but to confront it, and you have to decide. Well, in the same way, it's almost like intuition works with theory and rationalization to keep you forward in the effort to when you get to something that's left out and lacking, you can actually experience that lack as having some sort of causal force on you, as presenting you with a choice, right? Like in the same way, when Sartre's talking about, like, being is constituted by the negation, you could say, well, do you buy that? You know, you are thrown with a choice. Like, rationality could never bring you to the choice. Like, the choice is presented in kind of the break of where rationality could go, that then presents a choice that if you make the choice, you can reconstitute how you theorize it or how rationality acts. And so it's interesting because it's like, you know, people talk about apathetic, and it's like there's kind of like apathetic theology. It's almost like some kind of apathetic theory. It's almost like theory has a kind of apathetic character to it that then suggests why rationality and intuition has to work together, so that you can intuit that thing that's left out, and then when you get to it, actually find it as meaningful, even though theory is not there yet. So, for example, when you get to the problem, for me, I'm just obsessed with how I think economics has not answered the question, what is demand? And so you intuit there's something here, then you do the action of theory to say, wow, theory works great if it assumes this thing that it hasn't explained. And then you intuit that there's something here that needs to be explained. So you do the work and you start kind of constituting yourself. And then, of course, the spiritual move is then you kind of move and say, wow, I now see myself as a subject that's dealing with this question of demand. And then you're forced to kind of make the choice of should economics be reconstituted by this or not. So likewise, and then I'll give it back to you, like when you're talking about this division between kind of science and religion, and you have these kind of intuitions, like once you intuit that, and you kind of have this sense that theory has left it out, you're given a choice. You are forced to, as a subject, to make a choice. Are you going to push into that, or are you not going to push into that? And I think we can understand why that choice is so much the part of intellectual life if we understand theory as bringing you to the place of the things that are left out. That needs an intuition to work to that place of encountering what's left out, and then to be able to have the confidence to look deeper into the thing that's left out that is yet to be put into theoretical terms because, well, you just got there. In theory, you know, you had to do that work. So I've been thinking, and then I'll give it back to you, because I am increasingly fascinated how when you go through these different fields, it's like history had to be a process of genuinely theorizing to arrive clearly at the things that are left out. So then spirit can kind of break out of the determination of that theory and have a new constitution according to that what thing has been encountered. In the same way that in the phenomenology of spirit, you encounter limits that then makes you reflect on the limit, that presents you with a choice on if you're going to sublate that limit, self-consciousness to reason, for example. In the same way that you go through theory so you can hit the limit of where the theory is, so that you can then investigate that thing that has not been included in the theory to determine why. And it's like that intentional kind of incompleteness that had to be part of the picture in order to take that next step. But then, of course, and then I'll give it back to you, that begs the question of what kind of subject are we to have this capacity to be driven by this thing that is not included, this sense of a thing not included? How do we even have that capacity? Because then that would beg the question of, if indeed sense is mediated, if our experience is mediated, is it kind of mediated by, to be very speculative, is it kind of mediated by something about reality that has a sense of that thing left out? That it's kind of like you're participating in the thing left out while you're not, and you're realizing that, and it's moving you forward, like it's part of the fabric of reality, that's part of your mediation. And then the very realization of a mediation is realizing your senses is leaving something out. It's like all of reality in a weird way participates in this kind of collective structure that kind of speaks to something being left out. That then you, as the unique capacity of the subject, almost seems to be the ability to recognize that something is left out. Like otherwise, if we just responded to determination, you never realize something was left out. Like the ability that something is left out of your ability to understand almost seems to be the role of the subject in some way. I'm being very speculative, but I'll throw it back at you.
Well, I mean, that's all extremely interesting, and you covered a lot of stuff in there, and it's sort of a few things that sort of popped out for me. I really liked what you were saying, the idea that this unknown, what is left out, might be more real than anything else. It's more real than being. It's like the unknown is more real, at least from the subjective point of view, or perhaps even the not yet defined is more real. And then even just this, obviously there's direct parallels there with Hegel, the way that we can formulate a theory, we can formulate a conjecture. That's the thesis. That's the thesis. And then, immediately, especially within the scientific enterprise, you've got all of the young gun PhD students wanting to carve out a name for themselves. So they've got this vested interest in tearing down the theory, finding something that goes against the theory. It's like they're just motivated immediately to look for the holes in the theory. And, I suppose history teaches us that pretty much there always are, not just in the history of science, but in the history of our own lives. It's like I had an understanding, operated according to that understanding, and then reality happened. And now that understanding is the holes in it have been laid bare in some painful or visceral way, and off we go on that quest to understand what was lacking, what was missing, what was left out. It's really interesting. Some part of that reminded me of some of the things I just love discovering around some scientific discoveries or intuitions, some explorations into that space of the unknown or the paradoxical, or for example, my favorite one when I was a kid was learning about the Michelson-Morley experiment, which is an experiment to empirically test the speed of light. And what they basically discovered in the decade before Einstein's special theory, sort of 1895 or so, was that it didn't really seem to matter how fast you were traveling, that the speed of light would always be measured at the same speed. And they were bouncing light off Jupiter, right? It's a long way away. They can get some measurements on that. They wait when the Earth is traveling towards Jupiter, and then 6 months later when the Earth's traveling away from Jupiter. So there's a 6-month delay in that experiment, but they're essentially going, well, you're traveling towards Jupiter. The light coming from it should be going faster than when you're traveling in the same away from Jupiter, and the light's catching up with you. And it's always the same. So some sort of paradoxical empirical observation that seems to be fairly robust, and then not fitting within any certainly in the Newtonian picture. It's a completely at odds with the theory. And then it sort of took Einstein to propose something preposterous, almost. Something had to give. And what gave, which was to foundational aspects of 300 years of Newtonian physics, was time and space. Maybe time is relative and space is relative, and it's relative to how fast you're going. So your speed is now altering time and space and length and these parameters. Like, well, if now we just say that those things can be variable and not fixed, now we can account for that observation. And then out of that emerges this vast, rich theoretical framework of special relativity, and then general relativity, and then all of the explanatory power that has. And then, of course, eventually, running into there's no particular empirical evidence that goes against general relativity, except when you're dealing with the subatomic. So it's in 100 years of testing of predictions that were made in the 1900s and 1910s by Einstein, all of which now pretty much have been tested, and the results seem to match his predictions. So incredible explanatory power. Nonetheless, running into, so one of the other things then is listening to Eric Weinstein talk with Wolfram the other day. I think that talk was about somewhere around the 1 hour 40 mark, and Weinstein starts to talk about something which sounds incredibly Hegelian. He's talking about the limitations of scientific theories, and in relation to this sort of, radically alternative approach of Wolfram's, and some healthy competition there amongst this computationalist treading on the territory of physicists, and what the implications are for that, and defending their positions after hundreds of years of the maths equations, initial conditions approach. And he starts talking in a way around where the theories could not actually be formulated in order to meet the empirical observations. Not so much in the way that I described with Einstein, where there's good empirical evidence, but there's something paradoxical going on. It's more like just a sort of a lack of explanatory reach in anything that people could come up with. And then borrowing this concept from maths, which had no application whatsoever to the physical world, or at least to empirical observations, which was the notion of the square root of -1. Now, I don't know if I talked about that in the previous talk, but the conceit was, and this is where this is act of pure imagination, that effectively, it's like literally pulling a rabbit out of a hat and going, that's now, orthodox, scientific, theoretical orthodoxy. And what that was is, well, and according to the number theory at the time, what were then not called real numbers, but we call them real numbers now. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way up to infinity. 0 became a number. -1 all the way back became a number. Now, obviously, if you take a number like 4 has not just one square root, it has 2 square roots, right? 2 times 2 is 4, but -2 times -2 is also 4. And what that shows is just logically that there is no such number that how to put it, that a negative number is never the square of 2 numbers, because all squares are positive. So it's like, well, there's the rule. But then, the mathematicians came along and went, okay, well, it's clearly it's logically impossible. There isn't, according to the rule, you cannot have a negative number that has a square root. And so, well, let's just imagine that you can have that. Now, that's not a real number. It's not literally a real number on the real number line. But let's just call that root I for imaginary. You're just literally inventing something out of thin air. But now we can say, well, I squared equals -1. So we're going to imagine that there is a square root of a negative number, -1, which is I. We don't know, there's no definition of that. There's no concept really of that. It's just this placeholder, and we're just going to use that. So now we can imagine we've got, 1i, 2i, 3i, 4i, 5i, and so on. And then we can also have -i, -2i, -3i. Now, out of nowhere, we've got a whole other axis of a whole other number line, the imaginary numbers. And then you plot those as sort of x is the real numbers, y is the imaginary numbers. And now you can have a number on the number plane. So now the number plane has become far more fundamental or useful. Is this now considered part of the sort of scientific mathematical ontology? The number plane, is that more real than simply the number line? But the explanatory power of using this conceit has led to so much, all of the foundations of quantum mechanics, the Schrodinger wave equation, things like, Hilbert space is a sort of space of, all possible vectors. It's at least one type of vector space. And you've got, it's just this way that there's some aspect of the human imagination that runs up into a limit of understanding, and then something that is just posited that perhaps in some sense there's no, and I'm not a mathematician, and I'm not a sort of well out of my depth, but it has no other ontological ground other than just to say, there it is now, let's use it, invented out of nowhere. And yet in so doing, it's opened up this vast vocabulary for defining and expressing scientific theories, which also then make their own predictions, which then can be empirically tested. And it does seem in somehow that this descriptive framework is vastly more capable of predicting and explaining empirical observations. So that was just an interesting thing. And then there's tying that back to, I'm not sure how much of what I'm sharing overlaps with some of the things that you're talking about, but I'll just say one thing. You were saying around how the subject might be looking out into the world. I've noticed that I'm a consumer of goods, and maybe I'm just happily going about doing that, and then I sort of notice my bank account. I'm like, well, hang on a sec, this being the consumer of goods in the way that I have has now hit into some tangential limit, and I'm gonna have to alter, what kind of consumer am I? And you're saying, what kind of capitalist am I? Or these sort of external environments of possibility of defining myself as a subject. It could be in the relational realms, it could be in other aspects. There's one thing that struck me when you were saying that. I was listening to this Indian guru, Sadhguru. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Sadhguru at all. He's written a few interesting books, a great book on karma, stripping out all of the potential supernatural, metaphysical, baggage, if I could put it that way. I also wrote a book called Inner Science. And so talking about that there, and I mentioned it before, that when it comes to understanding what kind of subject I am, what kind of human being I am, it's not simply being in search of a descriptive reality, a description. Like, here it is, I've written it down now, this is the kind of, or even some practical understanding. Well, I mean, that's really what it comes down to, where he's suggesting that a lot of the malaise, especially in the West, you look at suicide rates amongst teenagers, especially teenage girls. You look at the impact of social media and how that's defining us in some sense through our interactions, coupled with this sort of massively asymmetric hacking and hijacking of our limbic system through the sort of maximizing attention on sight. The velocity or the rate at which information is pouring into us, sort of certain overwhelm of the human mind or capacity moment to moment to process everything, not just in a sort of in a neocortex way, but with our whole being, to really make sense of its value, of its utility, of whether it's worth engaging with at all. And so he suggests that coming out of the East, coming out of the deep wisdom of the contemplative traditions, of the inner experiential traditions, of the yogic practices, of the embodied, practice of the mind and the body in unison with each other, of the purposefulness of it, of the outcomes of it in terms of well-being, in terms of, let's say, whatever chi is, having more energy, having more focus, more determination, more clarity of thought. And that, so these things are not coming from a sort of external, objective, scientific, capitalist, materialist understanding of ourselves. And that's what has built these vast empires of technological sophistication and complexity, which is in a sense maybe detracting or deflecting or pulling us away from something more fundamentally human, fundamental to our humanity, fundamental to our expression of living a successful life. That in itself is an interesting thesis, antithesis, if you like, or perhaps that's not the right way to look at it. But there's certainly a distinction there between these two modes of being. Now, it's not like the West is, if I can put it in those terms, is devoid of the purposeful, spiritual, inner expression of how to live well and relate well and understand your subjectivity well. But it does seem to have been beguiled, like Ian McGilchrist talks about in his book, The Master and His Emissary. The master being that purposeful, willful, self-knowing human, and the emissary being just the neocortex, basically, in the mind and digesting concepts, and you often get lost in that labyrinth, in that hall of mirrors, and as we philosophers like to do. But perhaps at least we can recognize our enjoyment, if not a jouissance, at constantly inhabiting that realm at the expense of maybe getting more exercise, building other human relationships, flourishing in other ways. You better make sure you're enjoying it if you're going to be spending a lot of time in that way. But this notion that for him that the last 500 years of the West is characterized by the emissary kind of taking over the house and the master asleep at the wheel. And as a remediation and an antidote to that, Sadhguru is a great proponent of not necessarily simple wisdoms, but important and intuitive wisdoms and practices that can actually help to redress these large imbalances in the direction of the West, and of the technological capitalist will, and how we're all to some degree beguiled by it, subsumed by it, led by it, coerced by it, infected by it, and so on. Well, perhaps I'll leave it there for now.
Well, I think that was magnificent. There's a way in which, like, so for example, when spirit hears, oh, the master's been asleep at the wheel, it's spirit now in the sense that I have a choice. Am I going to keep the master asleep at the wheel or not? And once I hear that idea, it's so interesting because, like, you didn't ask for Ian McGilchrist to write the book, but once he does and the idea is out there, you're determined, I make a distinction between determination and necessity. You are necessarily forced to then decide what you're going to do about it and reconstitute your determination. And whenever there's a choice about a reconstitution of determination, that's spirit. That's kind of the spiritual move. Like, once you go, wait a minute, I am, when you're just going through the world, following the not letting the master sleep at the wheel, there's not really spirit. The moments of spirit are the presentation of a choice. Like, once you know that the master's been asleep at the wheel, are you going to let it keep being that way or not? Oh, and by the way, you can never go back to not knowing you made this choice one way or the other. So you can never go back. And spirit, then, that's why, like in Hegel, these kind of spiritual moments are kind of anxious. There's a kind of negation that's going, like, all this kind of negative language, because you've lost forever the ability to enjoy the master being asleep at the embassy and not knowing it. Now you have to know the master is asleep, and what are you going to do about it? So there's been a negation, but that very negation is the ground for the possible sublation, because now the master can wake up if you can get through that, right? And so I think that's very important. But it's funny because in order for that to occur, there's something about spirit that always has this reflective quality. Like, it has this ability to reflect on itself. And like you were saying, on kind of conscious, like memory, on kind of recalling, bringing this kind of story, in the same way that there's something about theory for me that's finding what's left out. It's almost like you have to kind of retrospect reasoning in order to kind of map out the entire terrain to see the thing that you're leaving out that you don't want to remember, like to find the part that you're leaving out of your mental model, so that you can then have a choice on if you're going to press into that or not, or you're going to keep living in the self-deception or your own kind of self-image. So there's a way in which we need the self to be kind of retrospectively interpreted so that we can then get a map to find the spot that's not included, that's kind of left out. But you see, the problem is, it seems like the subject is very prone to misunderstand the role of theory as providing, the understanding as opposed to helping you locate what's missing. It misunderstands the construction of the self as giving you a self versus making you locate what's missing, on and on and on and on. And it makes me, I love, first off, you're very gifted at explaining science and math. I love what you were saying about the imaginary numbers. One of the ways I've always kind of thought about that is it was like, let's just kind of imagine that this number is there. And then you found out that it wasn't nothing, that it was more like a lack, like a present absence. And if you include lack in your models, you get more explanatory and predictive power. Oh, wow. Like if you kind of posit this thing that you're making up and act like a thing that's just made up is actually present in your model, it becomes more powerful. It kind of suggests that lack is not nothing. But it also, too, a way I think for me, there's this tradition of theory as critique, Marcuse, obviously Marx, and like where the role of theory is to kind of critique the system and the power structure. And I think that there's a lot of value to that. But in a way, I've thought and been thinking more about metaphorically thinking about theory as locating a staircase, like locating the place that you can climb up to the next level, because the staircase, like a staircase, suggests that something is not included. Now, that can be what is meant by critique, but I think metaphorically now, critique is too difficult to use, because when people hear critique, they become the PhD student that just wants to tear down all the old stuff, as opposed to master it and really learn it to find where the staircase is. Like you talk about Einstein, like nowadays, people are like, oh, Einstein was wrong. He's missing out on quantum mechanics. But like you say, the amount of explanatory power is insane. Like I read that book on the eclipse, the guy who did the eclipse. I can't remember the name. I was like, oh my freaking gosh. Like you forget that, Einstein provides you all of this insane explanatory power. And so when you're like, Einstein was wrong, that doesn't seem to be proper. It doesn't seem proper to talk about critiquing Einstein. I mean, I get what people mean, but there's something dangerous about it, as opposed to, I want to like really learn Einstein to find the staircase. I want to find the point that needs to be explored, because it's almost like with the imaginary numbers, they located the staircase. It's like, well, let's just pretend this is a staircase. Let's just pretend that this eye here can be insane. Let's see where it goes, right? And it's almost like we need to think about theory as the necessary process to find the staircase. And the reason for that is that means you need to honor your masters. That means you need to learn Einstein, not just try to go destroy him. You need to find the point. And every single theory, if you want to throw in, like, sometimes I've called it the Gödel point, that point where, you have the incompletion, but the incompletion is part of the theory. It's very important that Gödel's incompleteness does not mean the theory is wrong. It means that every theory has to entail in its theory a point that is of incompleteness. Well, the incompleteness, I've just thought about words like staircase. I'm at the point now where I almost want to talk about Gödel's staircase. Like, this is the point where you climb the stairs up to the next level, and you could only find the staircase because of the theory. So so be careful with the metaphor, like the metaphors of incomplete, the metaphors of critique can create this impression that we can do without. Well, you would have never found the staircase without it. Likewise, again, there's something about, leaving the self behind, moving beyond the ego. But at the same time, the practice of constructing the self is the very act that you need to find the incompletion, the staircase to kind of move to the next. Likewise, you need spirit to go through science genuinely to get to the point where a thing can look at itself as a subject using science and different things. And if instead it's a mistake. It's a mistake for, like, a lot of religious people will say, oh, science destroyed the world and gave us the modern world. And that's kind of the problem with that language, is it's kind of the critique deconstruction. Like you're saying, oh, we would have been better off without science. It's like, no, the point is that now we need to find a staircase. Whenever you start having effacement, as I'll say it, or you have these pathologies, that's the evidence that a staircase was missed. That's the evidence that there was something that needed to be climbed. And that's why I think has happened in economics and also politics. There was a staircase that was not climbed, mainly in the question of demand. And we need to now climb that staircase and see where it goes and see what it means. Likewise, in democracy, there was the non-rational variable of the frontier that made the possibility to be practical but also abstract. That needs to now be explored. And if we don't explore those things, well, then you end up with something more pathological or something that's more dysfunctional. And so theory as finding a staircase, for me, has become a way to think about it, where you kind of, in that way, and then I'll give it back to you, you're honoring the past, you're honoring what other people have done, you're trying to master them to locate the point where there's a stairway, where there's something to climb that you're only able to find because of the work that they did. And that for me is how you can find. I'd be curious, what you think. I mean, for me, just kind of metaphorically thinking that way has been helpful to find a blend between tradition and progress, because those always seem to be at odds, right? Like, oh, you shouldn't think for yourself. You shouldn't think. You should just learn what the masters thought. It's like, yes, but there's always these kind of points of incompleteness that need to be climbed as a staircase. And if you don't do that, you're going to be in trouble. And likewise, if you don't think of yourself as trying to define yourself to find these points of incompletion, well, then you get a complete self that's then closed. And now you're fundamentalist, right? Like it's no different than one religion lost, when religion was apophatic, it in essence had a staircase, right? It had something to climb that could never be contained within the internal consistency of the religion. Well, once you lose that, it becomes fundamentalist and problematic. So it goes with the self, so it goes with theory, so it goes with every single field. You always have to have that staircase, or it's going to be enclosed and then you're trapped, in whatever structure you have. And at that point, spirit's stuck. Spirit can't advance anymore, because the act of, in a sense, climbing the staircase means you can look back and see where you were. You can then meta reflect on where you were. And that climbing of the staircase, or the arrival of the staircase, is then the moment of spirit. And that's also the moment of freedom. But freedom's terrifying, and it means, because if you don't know where the staircase is going, like, what am I going to see up there? And so the finding of the staircase, which you required theory to arrive at, is the moment of spirit's freedom, and it's precisely, though, terrifying. And I think we're at an age now where, it seems as if the realization that this is what theory is doing, this is what the construction of the self is doing, this is what memory is in the business of, is really important. Because then it's almost kind of weird, because if spirit then realizes this was the structure that spirit needed to be spirit, how will it then reflect on itself, measuring itself according to the terms of spirit as such that we're describing, like a meta move in a sense. But at this point, I'm just throwing in meta because the word meta is cool. But I'll throw it back to you. I can't help it. Meta's so neat.
Well, I mean, I think so much in there. I really love everything you're talking about there, and this notion of difference, where we focus on what is different, especially within, this is in-group, out-group mentality. And there's an aspect of that which is often, I used to even think, is one of the root of all evil in the world was thinking in-group versus out-group, rather than we're all cousins whose ancestors lived in Africa 80,000 years ago. And all of our ancestors until that point were, the descendants of those people, and essentially we're all one big group. Perhaps a little naive, but there seems to be a certain necessity to defining boundaries between things. Here's a group, whether it's a conceptual group or a group of objects or a group of people, that may have some utility. Maybe there's some people who have more need for medical support from the state and don't have the capacity to generate income. So we're defining that group. We can figure out who best gets the support. So, there's ways in which, but that's not really quite the same thing as an in-group versus an out-group. And I actually really like a lot of how Alexander Bard talks about this, and, that these things are sort of naturally going on. And what we've often found is that one group might be a group of bankers, or it might be a group of Machiavellian subversives that are plotting against some other out group, and they are then, or it might be a group of capitalists who are exploitative, which means simply that they want to maximally benefit from the efforts or labor or finances or money of some other group for their own benefit. So the very definition of exploitation. versus what Bard suggests that we all really need to be doing, whatever our group is. Like maybe you're really into cryptocurrency and you're a coder and you're just seeking out people across the internet. Now just remove the geographical boundaries entirely. You can find like-minded coders, maybe with slightly different skill sets, and we can kind of expand on whatever the creation or the software that you're going to develop with that that group of skills that is larger than your own. And then what you're doing in terms of maximizing benefit to yourself happens to also be maximizing or increasing benefit to the other within your groups. And so he uses the word employtive. So we all need to learn how to be employtative rather than exploitative. Nonetheless, boundaries exist. And when we were talking about fundamentalism, and we've spoken about that, where there's a certain, and it can occur in all of us in different aspects of our lives, and it can occur for different reasons. It might be based on some overarching sort of spiritual worldview in which all of your life and experiences and choices and purposes and relationship with your other community of believers, the church, as it were, conceptually speaking, the lives of your parents and other people in the community and their parents and the ancestors, and the dreaming of that tradition that's gone back in time and had successes that is now brought to the present day. I think we could be overly critical of the notion of a sort of a fundamentalist belief, and to be too critical of it. At the same time, they often criticize, perhaps for good reason, imagine the opposite of radical relativism. Nothing's really true. Pick and choose whatever you want today, maybe change your mind in an hour from now, see how you go. And I think there's a notion that there's sort of radical relativism, which maybe not an accurate portrayal of the opposite, is going to lead to problems. So then there is also the sense in which people's attachment, and myself included, to a particular belief or a particular framework of understanding has had and is having a lot of practical utility. And it's like, there may be alternatives that I've heard about that maybe I haven't dived in too deeply, or maybe I have dived in too deeply and gone, I see the truth in it beyond my current understanding, but the psychological, emotional effort required to retool myself on a broad level is like, I don't have the time necessarily. I might not have the emotional fortitude. I'm embarking on something that would require a great deal of courage. Maybe I don't feel like I have that. So I'm just going to stick to what I've got. And it's like a little bit like, Sam Harris talks about the moral landscape, where there's different peaks within that landscape. And you can imagine worldview landscapes, whether they are just purely conceptual or whether they are, practical and purposeful relational worldviews, that in order to come to that alleged higher peak over here, that other people might be talking about, maybe even people that you respect, maybe mentors, maybe beloveds, not just some esoteric or alternative group somewhere else in the world or the internet, that you actually have to come down from the worldview peak that you're on, which has a cost to it, in order to perhaps climb some alleged higher peak. And maybe it is perhaps a higher peak, a broader worldview, a more purposeful worldview, a more inclusive worldview, one that has better outcomes for my self-growth and my relationships with others and their relationships with me and others. So there's always this kind of opportunity cost, there's this sort of penalty, and we might come to that staircase that you talk about and go, I know if I climb to the top of this staircase, there's going to be a cost that I'm not prepared to pay. So I'm just not going to climb it. Do you want to stay in Plato's cave, or do you want to leave it? I really like moving on from that slightly. Something else you were talking about as well, and it's related to this, where like Layman Pascal has this philosophy of adjacency, and I've always, maybe more so in recent times, recognized I'm a conciliant thinker. Disparate ideas expressed in different formalisms or language or conceptual frameworks tend to have a very similar structure, or perhaps even a lot of similar semantics, more or less, if you can just put your head into that framework and then see how those sort of relations between concepts and levels of generalization or specificity actually have, maybe similar domains of applicability coming out of different traditions of knowledge. And I also, read a lot of evolutionary biology. There's Edward O. Wilson's book, Consilience, and he talks about the way that different branches of the evolutionary tree have evolved similar solutions to the problem of life, if I could put it that way. So, one example is wings. Turns out that bats, which are mammals, evolved flight, as it were. Bats evolved before birds did, probably by 50 million years or so. It was probably bats like 220 or 30 million years ago, and birds didn't really come along from their dinosaur ancestors until 80 million years ago or something like that. So and here's two completely different branches. The ancestors of bats and the ancestors of dinosaurs was a long time ago. That's, I don't know, roughly 300 million years ago or so, and they've independently evolved flapping wings to fly, and the benefits of that brings to those creatures. Eyes is another great example. So if you take, for example, the eyes of all fish, pretty much things like hagfish, which are not really fish, fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, birds, and all hominids being mammals, all of them have a common ancestor that had eyes, right? But there's at least 50 other examples in the evolutionary history of life where eyes evolved independently. So it's astonishing in a way that all fish, birds, mammals, reptiles, that's one common ancestor with eyes. So this solution to the problem of life in terms of vision and how it might help you to detect prey or avoid predators has evolved completely independently. And those solutions, like the eyes of squids and octopi, and the mollusca is one other branch. And their eyes, when you look at the structure of them, are actually way, way more efficient, because the detectors, I'll just mention this briefly, but the detectors are actually behind the retina. Whereas in humans, the detectors are in front of the retina, blocking the light, right? So it's a very inefficient design, but efficient enough to reach reproductive age, clearly, in our ancestors. So you can see that there are other sort of peaks of the evolution of the eye compared to what we have. And so in a similar way, the sort of conceptual landscape, the metaphysical landscape, the spiritual worldview landscape, may well have similar solutions that have evolved, culturally speaking, that may have greater utility, greater applicability, greater possibilities for discovering more ladders and climbing them, more open-ended. And so how do you get to those? And often when we focus on difference, and we focus on opposition, and we focus on the other versus, the in-group versus the out-group, if you're focusing on this difference, on the one hand, it maybe seeks to sort of reinforce the boundaries of your own group or your own worldview or your own identity, but it does seem to come at a cost. And that seems to be what's going on in the world. Is the very notion of increasing polarization seems to be even a sort of driven by a certain fears or concerns that the boundaries of yourself or your own group or your own worldview are going to be eroded by so many others that are distinct, that are vying for attention, that are vying for your participation, are vying for airtime on social media and the mainstream media. And of course, the opposite of that, which would just be to have no real boundaries at all, where you're just sort of sponging it in from everywhere and so on. I kind of feel like I've done that a lot myself. Also runs at the risk of, how do I put it? It's a very kind of personal experience in a way, but it can run into certain kind of mental health issues. It's like, there's a certain dissolution of value and a dissolution of worldview and a dissolution of understanding, because there's only so much you can really kind of contain moment to moment in your, application of your life and the living of your life. And if what you're drawing on as a value system or a worldview has itself been sort of dissipated across multiple value systems of worldviews, it can create a certain kind of existential angst in how to live. So, I've definitely gone through periods of that myself. So Layman Pascal, the metaphysics of adjacency. You know, there's looking at adjacent views that are similar, maybe evolved within the same culture, or maybe from different cultures, but are applied to the same domain of inquiry or practice. And then, you know, not being something that's too far away, but more likely that you can build bridges of understanding, formulate new vocabulary, new conceptual worldviews, and maybe even using that sort of Hegelian notion that you've got the two things that are distinct, perhaps not necessarily opposite, maybe more than two things, and you're sort of sublating across them in a conciliant way in order to perform, you know, a more inclusive or a grander narrative, or a more explanatory narrative, or one that's just strikes you in a way which is more, inspires your enthusiasm, inspires your engagement. I mean, you know, what do we mean? I mean, it's gone way off topic, but I'm not going to go into it. What do we mean by truth? Perhaps truth could be, does it maximize? I mean, this is maybe pragmatism, but does it maximize your engagement? Does it maximize your engagement with your own life, with others, with a sense of enthusiasm, with a sense of optimism, with a sense of discovery, a sense of leveling up, and all of those things that can come about through a sort of conciliant process of encounter with the other. And then just to end on another version of that, from Alexander Bard, he talks about being antagonic, or the concept of antagony, which is to say, seek out those who are, if not maximally different in their understanding, then at least sufficiently different in their understanding to provoke dialogue, which hopefully is still done in good faith. You know, there's no doubt about that. Bard wouldn't be talking about anything else particularly. But then by finding that greatest difference that is a constructive difference, that's where you might find the greatest opportunity for growth, for development, for understanding, for exchange, for world bridging. And he sees that, you know, the role of the shamanoid type would be to be those kind of bridges between disparate domains of spirit, of worldview, of human relating and activity. So I guess when we, just to wrap it up, you know, I've been fairly, you know, my sort of pursuit of knowledge and understanding and exploration of metaphysics and science and those kind of things. It's been a rather solitary pursuit most of the time, which maybe has had its own drawbacks. But there does seem to be a great deal of value to just immerse yourself in the relational encounter, and to find ways where you can do that with a boundary that is not sufficiently porous that there's too much pouring in or pouring out, and not so kind of concrete that you're kind of stuck within your own bubble. So you have to find that right level of sort of osmosis in your own boundaries as a human, on all levels, not just intellectually or necessarily even spiritually. You know, it could be in terms of your emotional well-being, relational boundaries, and things like that. Even the health boundaries. If I'm eating the wrong foods, you are what you eat, rather than eating healthily and so the wrong sort of boundary. So yes, well, there's just a ending on that note about boundaries.
Well, first off, I really appreciate all of that. And second, what you just described, because I keep mentioning Tocqueville, is basically the requirement of people to have experienced and gone through for democracy to be possible. And we have not had a society that is in mass, if you will, train people to go through those experiences. And so democracy has basically not been possible. And I'm increasingly convinced, again, and I may have mentioned earlier, that the liminal web is democracy. Like when people talk about philosophical discussion in philosophy, like that is democracy. We don't know what democracy is because we think it's a voting process. Democracy is philosophical discussion. Now, it's hard to even say philosophical discussion because we associate so much with the university system as studying the history of philosophy, but really like civic discussion is, for, you know, going back to Tocqueville, is very philosophical. What does it mean to be free? What should the role of government be for freedom? How should we use our free time? What is our duty to one another? It is like democracy what we are seeing with the liminal web is basically the possibility of democracy that maybe never in history before has been possible, because we have not had the internet, we have not had Zoom, we have not had the ability of people to say work at a wholesale and then talk philosophically with people around the world who have met the condition of being so capable of it, which again, the condition of being able to do democracy seems to be this sweet spot between fundamental but also not relativistic. Layman Pascal talks about the 99%. And it is funny because the difference between 99% and 100% is life and death, basically. It's everything. And that 1% that's missing in the metaphysics of adjacency is the staircase. And again, it seems like the correct model is where you kind of see things as a kind of house where you have your floor, you have your worldview. And Tocqueville explicitly discusses that the problem with democracy is that it confronts you with possibilities that you will never have the energy to fully explore all of them. You also have to say, well, I see a staircase here, but I've already been up 3 staircases. I need to find a floor I'm going to live on and make a bedroom. That's a very uneasy reality, but you have to accept it. Otherwise, you go crazy. And what Tocqueville's getting at, he's like, most people won't. And so, so he's like, democracy's doomed, basically. He's but we are in an age where it might be possible because of the internet, because of Zoom, or at least to have, I'm not necessarily saying democracy is the only way to do things, but we basically perhaps have not had the right meta structure by which to think about democracy, because basically what your mental cathedral has to be like is a house with many floors. And each floor has a staircase that goes to the next floor, and you've got to decide where you're going to be. And that means you're on a 99%, but there's a 1% that suggests there's something more, that the second floor can never be included on the first floor. So there's a humility there. But the first floor is not just a kind of anything goes. It's a concrete place. There are rules here, but there's a staircase. And so you find that balance of the subject that seems to be necessary, one, to live, to survive, especially in our very complicated globalized age, and then 2, seems to be necessary for us to engage with difference in a healthy way, because you understand there is a difference. There's a second floor. There's a third floor. There's a difference, but this floor is solid. And some people come down the staircase and then go back up. I go up and I come back down. That way of thinking allows you to find this middle zone between relativism and fundamentalism. And it's 99% gives you something solid, but the 1% gives you the humility to make space for the other person. And it's very interesting too, because when you talk about the comment, that was lovely with the eyes and different things. I know it's kind of this weird thing. There's a lack of common ancestor. It makes you think if there's some sort of common relationship that, to the world and the environment that leads to the same outcome, because there's some sort of common relation, even if there's not a common ancestor. And there's kind of also too, it would suggest, I like how you applied that as well to kind of metaphysics and different things. And it would seem like if we want to develop in a similar way, then there has to be a kind of common quality of relationship between people. And what we're suggesting here is, what is the relationship between 2 people that mentally their meta structure is like a house with floors, the 99% with the 1%? How would they relate to one another, and how would they develop together? Well, if you had that common relation, then the way spirit would develop, because it's kind of like spirit in the phenomenology is spirit is kind of like Geist in the philosophy of right. They're the same, but they're not the same at the same time, because the Geist is going to be emphasizing more of the political economy, more of kind of the state, but it has a collective structure just like spirit. So there's a kind of mapping, even if there's an isomorphic, even though they're distinct. It's what would if individuals had a quality of relation that was more spirit-like, that was possible because of a 99%, because of a metaphysics of adjacency, what would the development of Geist look like because of that shared common reality? Well, it would probably develop quite differently, and it might be where democracy is actually possible. A democracy that actually encounters the anxiety of difference, as opposed to keeping out minorities from the conversation, or while acting like you're not, or that is only operating not because people have philosophical training, but because they're envisioning a frontier that brings together the practical and the imaginary. But once there's no frontier, turns out we actually had not developed the inner resources to do philosophical reasoning as such. We had a kind of handicap, if you will. So once you realize that, is it the case now, because of a kind of realization of spirit of this need for this mode, could it be possible then to have a relation, an in common relation, that would have a common development of subjects without a shared ancestor, without a shared metaphysical ancestor, that would make possible a development of Geist that might be some sort of form of democracy that is actually democracy, as opposed to a handicapped democracy that kind of kept out difference? Well, that might be possible, but the condition for it, which I think you just put very well, ties with this metaphysics of adjacency. It's like if we're talking the membranics of Mr. Bard, and I like on every floor you're imploding. You're not, the first floor is not exploiting the second floor, and the second floor is not exploiting. You're imploding to your first floor, but you also realize there's a staircase. There's something that's not included. You have to understand that it's a membrane, not a kind of solid wall. And so that, though, as a metastructure, all speaks to what would really be necessary for people to have a common relation that's more democratic in character, that can sort of transform them, because you're acknowledging, and then I'll give it back to you, you're acknowledging that something is left out, you're acknowledging that your floor is not the entire house, but you're doing it in a manner like, the only reason that staircase is there is because there's the structure of the home to hold it together, so the staircase can be there. Like if you didn't have the structure of the floor, there would not be a staircase. So you need the structure for there to be a staircase. But you also realize that you can't treat the floor like the entire house. And in fact, maybe you should check up. Maybe you should actually go upstairs and see what's up there. Maybe you should kind of develop the courage to face that anxiety, because there might be something there. And so then it opens possibility, because as soon as you say there's a staircase, well, there's a kind of, if the first floor starts to suck, or there's something kind of lacking from it, or if your mental health is starting to depreciate, well, then there's a staircase to be explored. If it turns out that the economic model of Washington consensus or neoliberalism is leaving things to be desired, well, let's check out this staircase of the question of demand that has not been explored. Maybe there might be something there to a better floor. There might be another possibility. But definitely that way of thinking, and then I'll give it back to you, seems to be the necessary kind of metastructure by which we might engage with difference and not be overwhelmed by it. That we can engage with difference and actually then have a creative common relation between all of the differences that can then develop us by a different spirit quality that would then have different qualities for Geist. So I think that mental model is very, very important if we as subjects are going to actually be able to handle, engage, well, frankly, difference. Because honestly, people may talk a big game about liking diversity and liking difference. I've not seen evidence that human beings in mass actually like difference. They tend to talk about it. They tend to say that they like difference, but it's within a certain field. That is, we like difference until it's too different. In a funny way, and then I'll give it back to you. I'm just increasingly interested. It's like we've never in economics figured out what demand is. We've never, in a sense, really done democracy, and we've never actually done diversity in a kind of deep way, because there's a certain conditioning that's required for it that we haven't done. And yet at the same time, we kind of had to intuit the values of those things so that we could theorize it to see that we hadn't actually done them yet, to kind of arrive at the point of incompleteness. And so in a way that's very exciting. As in another way, it's daunting, but in another way, it suggests a quality of being is possible, precisely at this point where people seem to have given us, maybe some people, there can be a sense of a giving up on that sort of thing.
Well, I think, it's very interesting you talk about difference, and we're both talking about engaging with difference. And, I was just thinking about, what a pleasant conversation that we're having here. And, we can... I could be sitting here thinking about, how this is great interacting with Daniel. It's like he's never really kind of contradicting anything I'm saying. He's not trying to be competitive with what I'm doing. And it's just this great sense of of trust building. of a sense of mutual exploration of ideas and learning and bouncing off each other and all of that. So there's these sort of levels of sort of psychological, emotional, the undercurrents of human relating, let's say. What is the subtext? What is unspoken? What is maybe even a lot of the time more visceral? It's like, can I trust this person? Are they acting in good faith? And rather, we often sort of make this assumption that, well, if we go into dialogue, we're going to discuss difference, we're going to mediate across disagreements, that we need to do it in good faith. And that it's only really when it's done in good faith that it's really worth engaging with at all. And, if you're not doing that, then, shame on you. And then at the same time, that is not all that's going on in the world. People are constantly engaging with each other, not just individuals, but groups and even entire nations, deliberately not in good faith in order to either exploit or overcome. I think a great example, again, from the world of life and evolutionary theory is simply the predator-prey relationship. It's like, I'm going to do everything I can to evade predation. And you are my predator, you're my enemy because you're seeking my annihilation in the form of becoming your dinner. And the predator is going to do everything it can to annihilate you in order to eat you. And literally, this is the most oppositional enterprise, oppositional relating that can possibly take place. Is on one hand, the antelope is not necessarily seeking the destruction of the tiger or the lion, but the lion is. But really, in another level of analysis, the antelope is just trying to escape and survive, and the lion is just trying to have some food to feed its cubs. So the rationales behind that behavior. If you imagine if they were intelligent enough, let's say constrained to their behaviors, but were able to be aware of the rationales of the other, the antelope might say, no, fair enough, lion. It's like, I really accept and understand that you're just doing what you need to do, but nonetheless, I'm going to sort of try and foil your attempts at every possible opportunity because I don't want to get eaten. So, is that acting in good faith? Clearly not in that case, but there's a sense in which that very activity of predating, trying to be successful at predating and trying to avoid predation over millions and hundreds of millions of years is exactly what has given birth to new life forms, to new ways of being, to new predator-prey relationships. And so when we focus on, which we don't, on the surface of things, we're focusing on, hey, we've established that we're going to engage in this dialogue in good faith and a community of good faith actors in order to maximally generate good outcomes, constructive outcomes, new knowledge, better relationships, and yet at the same time not acting in good faith, or at least detecting. I'm going to imagine for a second that I'm someone that notices that I'm in a community of people and sort of always maximizing acting in good faith. Well, from an evolutionary point of view, they're exploitative. And there's a benefit to not acting in good faith in terms of harvesting their resources, commandeering them into an army for my purposes, getting them to believe what I want to believe by infiltrating their thought, subverting their thought, and 1,000 other ways which we're actually kind of going about doing these things. And then it comes down to, we talked before about deception, self-deception, deception of the other, and sort of maximally equipping ourselves to detect bad faith actors, and then not just necessarily leaving it at that, but in some sense engaging with them, not necessarily by choice. That might be a little bit dangerous, but perhaps not. But then engaging them out of not having a choice, because they're undoubtedly engaging with me whether I know it or not. So what way can I sort of maximize my awareness of other intentions? Maybe you've phrased a whole bunch of stuff. You've seen that British mentalist Derren Brown, an absolute expert in planting thoughts into people's heads. He does this great example where a marketing executive or a marketing person works for a marketing firm, And maybe there's a few of them. I can't remember the exact scenario, but it goes like this, where he's basically had 3 or 4 members of this team followed for several months and has planted stooges all the way along the way to work, whether it's the person that cycles past them on the bike, or whether it's a placard on the side of a hot dog stall that they see every day. And over a period of time, he sort of implanted certain concepts and ideas. And then he comes to them 3 months later and says, all right, you guys, I want you to come up with this marketing advert for me for this marketing campaign. And basically at the end of it, they produce this advert, and then he basically shows them that here is the advert that I predicted that you're going to produce. And they all look at the ad that he says, and they've all come up with the same ad. And it's simply from this process of, and then of course, another example is just the way that social media is hijacking our limbic systems. And then to some degree, let's say that the real estate of thought of my available computation time of thinking about things here with you in my life and whatever, that some of those thoughts that I'm having were in some sense not really generated from within or by me. Now that's true in some sense in the conversation we're having, because they're always coming in from outside. But it's a kind of a clear awareness that that's what we're doing. We're encountering each other's theories and ideas, and then taking them on or considering them or whatever. But with the social media giants, it's sort of this asymmetric assault on us by the algorithms to maximize attention and to feed thoughts into us. And then it's in some sense some part of the real estate of my mind, and perhaps more or less for different individuals and different age groups and people more or less susceptible, that is simply not owned by them anymore, which means that their behavior and actions is no longer really, they're not really sovereign or autonomous over it, and not necessarily aware. So this necessity to skill up on our awareness of the subtext, of the difference, of deception, of self-deception, of the good faith or otherwise actions of others, and everything else that's kind of going on here in the sort of human relational realm that's below the level of us going, oh, I had a great conversation with Daniel and he had lots of ideas that were great, and as a result of the ideas that he shared, it was worth engaging with him again. But actually there's a whole lot else going on here as well that might make us more or less inclined to engage with us again, not just that. Recognizing that we're acting in good faith, the fact that we're sort of mutually enjoying ourselves with each other, and recognizing that, and etc., all these aspects of human relating that sort of seemed on some level, at least maybe it's just the conversations I've had or the ones I've been listening into and so on, that seem in some sense to be left out of these sort of metaphysical and ontological explorations that philosophers do.
I really like everything you shared, and one of the things, sometimes I think, like we were talking about this interesting predator-prey relationship, it's almost like now there's a kind of like thinker problem pursuit, like you have a problem, or there's like intelligence is looking for kind of framing, and what your prey is that framing or the solution to the problem, where intelligence, like you had to go through a predator-prey to get to the place where you had the intelligence arise, and then it's almost like seeking out the unknown, like you're pursuing. I know Vervaeke has been talking about after Socrates or different things. So it's kind of interesting, because then I was reading, I think a lot about, E.O. Wilson in The Social Conquest of the World, I think it is, where he compares, he talks about dolphins. And he's like, why didn't dolphins become like the masters of the world, like humans did, right? And he's like, well, because arguably dolphins were very intelligent. They are very intelligent. So why didn't they create cities or whatever? And it's like, he talks about, well, one, they had flippers. So they couldn't pick up stuff and like point at tools or different things, right? And the other, so that was a problem. So they couldn't think about tools. The other thing he points out is the campsite. Dolphins didn't have a campsite where, mammals, I'm not an expert on the names, but, they sat around a campsite, and they had and what's very interesting is tools plus big brain plus campsite equals kind of the conditions that give rise to the social takeover of the world, really. I mean, where intelligence kind of takes off, really, and you get the social conquest of the world, where dolphins didn't. And what's kind of interesting is it's almost like, although we're not dolphins, there's a way in which if we have non-relational intelligence, then we fall back on almost becoming like dolphins. Whereas when we have kind of a social engagement with intelligence, like a good conversation or different things, there's a way in which you're kind of tapping back into the very things that makes human intelligence kind of so special. And that requires, though, the good faith dynamics. And there also is something where at certain levels of complexity, it's so impossible for you to like think of everything, like you can't be an expert in everything, that you require almost these kind of, you know, what some people have called dialogos conversations in order to get a kind of framing to understand what you as a thinker should be pursuing. Or to even like you as a thinker are trying to find a theory that can kind of contain all the diversity and how to engage, and you're pursuing that like prey. But you need, well, it's like the hunter-gatherers, right? You need like a group of people to hunt down the animal. Like we have to hunt down the metaphysical framework together, and that requires the good faith. Otherwise, we're not going to trust one another, so we're not going to hunt it down together. And it's almost like the movement, it's almost like the amount of good faith needed in the intellectual exchange increases the complexity of the topic that you are dealing with. Because I think about like, why is it that Hegel and and Schelling, and you look at Randall Collins, like you had all the Bloomsburg group, you had like like when you had these like cutting edge intellectuals, they all knew one another. Now they didn't always get along, but there's some sort of notion of community comes together, Scottish Enlightenment, whatever, because it's almost like you had to have that many heads networking to kind of think that sort of level, to know what you should be pursuing. And it's almost like the good faith that you have to detect in conversations like, oh, I can go on a hunt with this person. This person's going to help me think things I've never thought before. This person's going to help connect things I've never connected before. And thus you're moving from a kind of dolphin intelligence, if you will, to speak metaphorically, to kind of that campfire difference, which today it's like we almost kind of got away, with the last 100 years of not emphasizing human intelligence in this manner, because of the market, because of the economy, because it was able to create a certain wealth and kind of prosperity that was enough to kind of get us along. But then you're at a point where it seems that not knowing what demand is and the great stagnation has reached a certain limit. And then, of course, if you go back to Dietrich McCloskey, she's basically screaming at you that wealth and technology is a result of rhetoric, is what she calls it, basically conversation and the intellectual community. I think her work as an economic historian is just absolutely invaluable. And if she's correct, you're basically seeing that the development of, because we always have to remember, wealth is not a matter of dollar bills. Wealth is technology, ultimately, air conditioning, flooring, and whatever. And what she points out is that suddenly in the Dutch Empire, people started talking about work having dignity and humans should have the freedom to solve their problems. You put those together, change the way people talk and interact, how they're toward to one another, which changes how they're toward the world. Suddenly they start inventing a lot of stuff. Suddenly they start solving a lot of problems. But then, of course, the very successes of capitalism then create capital that changes how people relate to one another, and they stop relating to one another in that creative rhetoric manner that creates all the wealth, and then you have the great stagnation. That's kind of what I argue is that rhetoric creates the conditions where it is taken over by discourse, which then makes it seem like it wasn't rhetoric that created wealth, but discourse, and everything kind of goes astray. But it's like what you see now is the complete necessity of kind of regaining that culture of rhetoric, if you will, which then is precisely the environment of that campsite that E.O. Wilson is talking about. And like that kind of intelligence that has that capacity to be socialized, that if it is not socialized, then there are certain limits it can encounter. Like not limits that it can sublate, but limits it doesn't even know is there. Because the key to encountering the other person is the other person can help you encounter limits to what you know, but in a manner that can make them not feel like walls, but staircases. Like, oh, I never thought that. Okay. And then you start moving. And the more you do that, the more you can get a mental construct that can kind of hold these things together. So it's almost like, and then I'll give it back to you. And alas, I'm going to have to go in like 10 or so minutes. Yes, exactly. So that's funny. So it works out. So, and it's like, this has been delightful. And it's almost like the predator-prey relation is almost located at the level of abstraction. Like where if your most abstraction is basically just biological, then it's located on the biological. But as you move to the mental, it's like the thing you pursue is more like an abstract notion to kind of bind people together. And if you fail to do that, well, then you fall back on previous, predator play, nationalism, war, conflict, and you're trying to move ahead. Now, I don't want to make it sound like an enlightenment dream that human intelligence can avoid the real of Lacan or different things. But there's something about the capacity to as subjects. Well, and the other reason why not is because basically to do this, you got to be able to handle the anxiety of doubt. You get like it's not an avoiding of the real, because you have to come to terms with yourself as a subject. You have to live with a reality that has a staircase. So it's not a certain sort of rationalistic transcending or anything like that. But there's something about this that locates where the predator-prey relationship is, where the pursuit is, where the thing that you're after is. And again, and then I'll give it back to you, if we've actually never become the subjects that can actually do democracy, which means we've never been the subjects that can actually do philosophy, which is what you have to do to handle difference, then we've actually never, we're still arriving at the place where we can sort of pursue something at that higher level of abstraction, that higher dimensionality, if you will. But we seem to intuit that it's possible, but we have to find how to climb the staircase to that place, if you will.
Well, that's interesting. Just on the notion of that really democracy is this is the dialogue, and it's a good faith dialogue, and out of that there's growth in understanding. There may be growth in sort of applicability and sort of real world, bringing about effective real world change. Obviously, the very idea built into it that ultimately does come down to a vote amongst the populace, an informed populace, ideally, and yet within that you might have radically different points of view, and so you're almost sort of taking an average. Maybe 49% of the populace feel like it's like going left is the way to go, and the other 51 say to go right, and the vote comes and the decision is right, and it's just cancelling out it's so incredibly reductive on the level of the vote, and often extremely slow as well. When voting, the midterms is it in the US, they come around every 2 years, and then the federal presidential vote is every 4 years. In Australia, it can vary from 3 to 5 and so on. But it's like so many decisions in public life these days, whether it's around technology or biomedical technology, even the application of certain sort of physics, are things that even the policymakers are not able to keep up with in order to formulate good policy, which is, then does it even filter down to the general population, or the general population is immediately concerned about this one political issue, but it turns out that that other party has got a whole bunch of great policies that would actually do much more for the world. They just don't have the right policy around this particular issue, and that's the one that decides the election. And it's all just, I think, from what I understand, South Korea, that has a very progressive digital minister of digital technology, and they are looking at much better ways, much faster ways, more progressive ways for the populace to vote on issues without waiting for these sort of lumbering election cycles and so on like that. Maybe I'll wrap it up there.
No, I think that I think Tocqueville, if he was alive, would almost vomit at our conception of democracy as being basically who gets the most votes. That to him would be such a, reductionist, frankly, and counter notion to democracy as culture, that then he'd be like, well, no surprise that democracy has failed and y'all hate it, because that's y'all don't meet the precondition. And really, again, what you're saying in South Korea, these different ways of voting, that's what would need to be looked into. But again, none of that, you can have all the voting structures you want. If you don't have the subjects that are able to engage with democracy in the right way, it's not going to matter. And again, on a hopeful note, I do wonder and feel as if the liminal web does suggest the possibility of the kind of engagement that makes a civic society. That's more like a return to something that Tocqueville is saying. But it's, and because there is a way too where when you say, like, there's always a weird thing when people are like, are you doing philosophy? And you're like, is it philosophy? I guess it is. It is and it isn't, but it's also talking about science and then Hegel, and it feels like it's integrative and consilience and different things. Like, I remember people were like, oh, you like philosophy? And I'm like, oh, I guess so. But like philosophy is just kind of where you end up when you think long enough in some respects. And it's kind of just what you do when you think about ideas. Once you, for me, that can kind of help show why philosophy in this sense is democratic exchange. It is democracy, because it's not merely like, philosophy is not merely all the people that read Kant get together and talk about Kant. It's about a certain way of approaching ideas. It's a certain horizon of relating and different things like that. And I think we're in an age where we need to think about technologies to make that more possible in different ways. But Peter, I know you have to go. I have to go as well. I've really enjoyed speaking to you. I'll throw it back to you for the last word if you like, but I just want to say it's always a treat. And I'm always impressed by the way that you can exposit, to explain, go through so many theories, so many ideas, and bring them together. It's really wonderful. And it's a treat to speak with you, Peter.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity. But also back at you. I mean, it's always an absolute pleasure to just appreciate and learn from you, and how widely read you are, how you also bring together different ideas and concepts, and just staying really very abreast of so much that's going on. Just on the other point briefly, is this notion, I think, from Foucault about the transition from periods of theory to periods of practice and action. And so we certainly seem to be in that period right now where a great deal of thought is necessary as the sort of overarching sort of paradigms, whether they're sort of religious or even the sort of Western paradigm, which maybe even peaked at the end of the Second World War, where there's this grand unification of motivations under the rubric of peace and freedom and opportunity is never at its highest. And yet here we are now facing climate change, political unrest, and the sort of dissolution of power structures from, the internet, from cryptocurrencies, from the democratization of knowledge out of the old institutions, and the paradigmatics that Bard talks about as well. So it's this place in history where it seemed like there's maybe not never been another time where there was so much need for theory, but certainly it is a time of great need of theory. That's why I love what Cadell Last is doing at Philosophy Portal, because these sort of contingents of young and very enthusiastic thinkers who are engaging with Hegel, and Cadell wanting to update Hegel for the 21st century, and seeing all of the ways that can be applied and is being applied across so many domains of knowledge, but then also how that can be much more practically brought to bear in the lives of our people in our community, in our personal lives, in our choices and our actions and our dreaming and our building and our hopes and dreams for the future, and turn that theory into something that is just extremely practical and not just something that's sort of an esoteric pursuit of people with nothing better to do. Put it that way.
I think that is perfectly put. And like I said, to see all of those things does give me hope in the possibility of this new quality, this different quality of relating. And I think it is important because, like you say, we need theory more than ever. Peter Robson, is always a treat. Thank you, sir. I've really enjoyed it. I wish you the best, and I look forward to doing it again. We'll have to do it again, and I wish you the best in all of your work and studies. It is always a treat. So thank you for your time today, my friend. All the best to you. I really appreciate it, Peter. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Likewise. Thank you very much.